Hey, this is John Ridley.
And this is Matt Carey, documentary editor at Deadline.com.
Matt, are you well?
Yes, doing well indeed. It's an exciting time in the world of filmmaking in general, certainly for documentaries, because, Telluride just wrapped, Venice Film Festival has closed, Toronto International Film Festival happening, Camden International Film Festival, which is all documentaries happening. So we're into the fall cinema season, and certainly Doc's right at the forefront of that.
Yeah, a lot of things coming up, a lot of good things on the horizon in the doc space. And as you say, sometimes we could certainly use some good news around docs, because I just feel like there's this, this constant beast that's like over the shoulder waiting to devour documentaries. That's pretty severe. Maybe it's not that quite that bad, but one of the things that's going on that you and I have not talked about yet, but I do think that you and I both are like-minded in the sense that we would really like to talk about that and bring in some people who are really affected. But that's obviously what I will say is this ongoing war by the current administration against history, against knowledge, and against things that ultimately, in my opinion, really elevate stories told by those who are traditionally marginalized and outside the prevailing culture. And that is right now showing itself in basically the shutdown and the demise of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which has over decades, really supported all kinds of storytelling, but in particular, documentary storytelling.
Yes, I mean, they're a funder of PBS and NPR. They're not the only source of funding, of course, for PBS, but there's already immediate repercussions from Congress under pressure from President Trump rescinding funding that had already been approved for the CPB, which is Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They took a Republican-led Congress, took away more than $1 billion in funding. And right away, we saw American Experience, long running show on PBS that is produced by GBH in Boston. They've laid off a bunch of their staffers. And ironic, guess maybe that would be the word, that this is happening as the U.S. is approaching its 250th anniversary, where we'll all be thinking about American history. And American Experience, at least for right now, not going to be producing any more documentaries.
Yeah, I have always, look, I'm going to say this. Oftentimes I talk about where my intelligence lays, but I'm going to be on the real for you for a second. When I was growing up, the one subject that I really excelled at was history. And I loved it. And I love, just even as a young kid, I'm talking in elementary school, particularly a fascination with the Civil War. I was a black kid growing up largely around white folks, and just that concept of something that I could talk about that was important, that challenged in some ways. And as I grew up, I remember watching Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War, which really began to set the standard for broadcast documentaries. That was The American Experience. Eyes on the Prize, an amazing documentary that really was a distillation of the entire civil rights movement. All the way up to Last Days in Vietnam, which was and correct me if I'm wrong, but an Oscar-nominated documentary that came out of The American Experience that was just phenomenal.
Rory Kennedy, the director.
Yeah.
Robert F. Kennedy's youngest daughter.
Yeah, this was a film series that from its inception till, unfortunately, it still has a season. I believe it's just going to be a super truncated season that just started. But if you really wanted to understand America, and I will say this as someone who is the son of a teacher, the son-in-law of a teacher, the brother-in-law of a teacher, that America does a shit job, and yes, I use the S word, a shit job of teaching about history and teaching about history from outside the prevailing culture. So when this goes away, it affects all of us, but it certainly affects people of color. And one of the people that you've talked about and remind me about, and actually was included in an article in the New York Times about this, Stanley Nelson, who has also presented films that were award-winning through the American experience, and one of the truly great documentary filmmakers who tells American history, period, but it happens to be American history from the perspective of people of color. This is going away. And again, I will say this, bad for all of us, but so much of what the president doing is, punitive and really wants to, forget about literally the American experience from all people, but is more interested in holding up the lost cause and things like that. And propagandist storytelling, I would say, over rigorous storytelling that really presents, or at least tries to present, a more accurate picture of, again, no pun intended, the American experience. So I talked about propagandist storytelling. I talked about storytelling with an edge. And in some ways that leads into what we're talking about on Doc Talk today.
Yes, we're very delighted to have the filmmaker Andres Veiel with us, whose new film now in theaters in the U.S. is Riefenstahl, about Leni Riefenstahl, who really wrote the book, if you will, or created the cinematic language in service of Nazi ideology. And it's a really extraordinary film, premiered at Venice last year.
You hit me to this film early on, and you told me many times. I think there's one person who can say, hey, John, I think I'm in your head. I think I know what you like. Certainly you and I have had many discussions about films. This is a film that challenges in terms of its content, but also has a really amazing aesthetic. And when one is making a film about an incredible filmmaker, I think one is challenged in terms of how they put that film together. And as you say, Andres Veiel has really found his own language to talk about and deconstruct Leni Riefenstahl. I don't quite say her name with the gusto that you do, but someone who really, really created, as you say, a language of cinema that is in support of fascism. And you can still see that. You can draw a line from Triumph of the Will to how many dictators try to create their image and dispense their image in the modern world. So here's our conversation with the director of Riefenstahl, Andres Veiel.
Filmmaker Andres Veiel, it is such a pleasure to have you on Doc Talk. Your film is Riefenstahl, about the famed German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, who was known as Hitler's favorite filmmaker. You and I talked a year ago where you premiered your film at Venice, and now you're coming out in the United States. It's great to have you with us. Thanks for being on Doc Talk.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you, Matt and John. John Ridley, it's an honor to talk to you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. I feel the same way watching this film. As somebody, I never went to film school, but I don't think that you can grow up and be interested in film and not know Leni Riefenstahl's work. But there's a difference between knowing the work of an individual and the individual themselves. And I'm curious, well, first of all, let's start with this, because I do think there's some people who may not know who Leni Riefenstahl is. So can you break down who she is as an artist, but also how she's remembered as a propagandist?
Yeah. First of all, Leni Riefenstahl, somehow you can say famous for her films she did as a propagandist. We have to start with it. In the Third Reich, in the National Socialist regime during the Hitler era, she was famous to produce and to direct Triumph of the Will, film on the party rallies, but also Olympia. She filmed 10 days of the Olympic Games in 1936. There's a lot of presence of Adolf Hitler in the film, but also it's a celebration of the strongness of the victorious. And so it's, in fact, a film about not only Nazi Germany in these years, but about ideology and the aesthetics of a regime which was not only celebrating the strongness and the victorious, but also, in a way, condescending and neglecting the weakness, the sickness. And that's part of the fascism. And that's why she became not only famous, but very, very controversial, because she was a propagandist for the Nazi regime, because her ideology and the aesthetics worldwide, she had a lot of people who admired her, even now, until now. There was some sort of, you can say, splitting up ideology, politics from aesthetics. So if you reduce her films on the aesthetic part, you can celebrate her, because as an editor, she was a very great editor. But again, she was a propagandist for Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich.
Die Politik ist das Gegenteil von dem, was mich mein ganzes Leben lang erfüllt hat. Das ist Kunst für mich.
Part of what you're talking about, that separation of Leni Riefenstahl as a technical master, and she was as a director, and also understanding, we're talking the high point of her career was in the 1930s, right? So this is a woman in a man's world, in a man's space, who achieved things. And that's how many people remember her. There are others who do think of her as a Nazi propaganda, someone, and you talk about this in your film, who made these Pied Piper films, basically indoctrinating, what we would use that word indoctrinating now, people to the Nazi ideology. But that's separated, right, after the war. Talk a little bit about, because what your film also deals with is how post-war Leni Riefenstahl really cultivated her image that many people, and you talk about Quentin Tarantino complimenting her, Jodie Foster complimenting her as an artist, but not really joining her artistry with the message, which was Nazism and fascism.
Yeah, and that's, for me, it's a bit naive, as you said, to separate ideology from aesthetics and the message. Because when you look closer on her story in the 30s, like after Olympia, I always looked at the way how she treated people around her, the DOP, Willy Zielke, for example. It's a very good and interesting story. Why? Because he worked for her. He was shooting the prologue of Olympia, of the film. And it's really ingenious, but he had a breakdown. He was admitted to the psychiatry, and he was forcibly sterilized because diagnosis was schizophrenia, and it didn't fit in the image of healthiness. And Leni Riefenstahl didn't intervene. She just thought, okay, it's part of the ideology, and we can't admit people who are so-called sick, psychotic, in his case, to get to have children. And that's a very good example that you can't separate her ideology of the Third Reich from her work, because part of the ideology was disdaining the weakness, disdaining the so-called foreigners. And we know, after contempting these people, what followed. It was the destruction, it was the death, it was the killing of millions of people. And so you have to put these elements together. And otherwise, I think you won't get the real point of Leni Riefenstahl, who was a convinced National Socialist. Full stop.
She tried to cleanse her reputation, and you bring in all the evidence that contradicts the official narrative she tried to push, that I took an assignment from Hitler, and she says at one point, if Franklin Roosevelt, the American president, had asked me to do it, I would have done a film. If Stalin had asked me to do a film, I would have done that. So fascinating how you construct the film and then really take apart her supposed defenses.
Yeah, well, the interesting point, you mentioned Roosevelt, but I'm not really convinced that she would have done a film for Roosevelt, because there is some sort of affinity with the ideology of the Nazi regime. And actually, in the findings of her archives, 700 boxes, there was a small hint of an article of an interview in 1934, 1 year after Hitler came to power. She gave an interview to the Daily Express, and there she mentioned, I bought Mein Kampf, even 1932, 1 year before Hitler came to power. And I had just read the first page, and I became an enthusiastic National Socialist. So, and of course, this interview was not in her archive. So her archive was her estate. Before she died, she prepared it. Of course, she manipulated it and threw things away, etc., etc. But the interesting point for me was, I think her affinity to these ideals of the Nazi regime, it started much, much earlier. It's like a deep root, the breeding ground when you look at her childhood. And that was, for me, a little episode which was quite important, which I discovered actually in the drafts of her memoirs, also which I found in her archive, in her estate. And there she writes about the violence she experienced, first of all, by her father. It's a little scene. It's also in the film. She had to learn how to swim, and she was thrown into the water. She was close to die. And the consequence in her written documents, in the drafts of her memoirs, the last sentence was not, I had a nasty, aggressive father threatening me. I was a victim of him. No, the last sentence in this chapter was, I became a good swimmer. So she identified with the strongness very, very soon, very early in her life. She knew, I have to survive, and I have to identify with the strongness, with the healthiness, the beauty. And then the second, you can call it even a lesson. For me, the second lesson was something like the experience, the encounter of the First World War veterans.
Yeah.
And there's a small part in the film, Udet, the pilot, a very famous pilot. He wrote something like, we came out of the ashes of the First World War, and actually we became even stronger because of all these drama and tragedies. We became stronger, and this was our chance in the very end to assemble under the flag of the Führer, of Adolf Hitler. And there you also can see there's something like a preparation to identify with the strongness, with the heroism, and to detest, to disdain the weakness. And that's an element she had a same affinity. Yeah. And so for me, the interesting point, Leni Riefenstahl, for me, is something like a prototype of fascism, a very universal prototype. She's very specific, of course, in her talents as a filmmaker, as a directress, as an editor. But regarding her ideology, you can consider her as a prototype of fascism. And that was, for me, a very interesting approach, because somehow she is timeless. She's also very present in a way.
It would have been easy to merely do a film about someone like Leni Riefenstahl, and as Matt said, just show the receipts. That's all. This is where this person was wrong. This is where they were evil, and that's it. But you do show a lot of context in her life. You talk about her father not just throwing her in the pool, but there's a story where he beats her badly with a coat hanger. There are moments where she talks about other men in the Third Reich who tried to force themselves on her. There are these stories that put her into context. I read an interview where you said it was important to show her as a person as well as tell the truth. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. Just talk about that approach in terms of how you wanted to shape her and show her, and why it was important to not just indict her, but say, look, this was a person, she was of her time, but that doesn't excuse what she did.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk in a way, this ambivalent approach. Because, of course, first of all, I also thought, let's stage a tribunal. because she lied, she created a lot of legends. And John, you are right. It's too easy just to make a tribunal and to point at her. She's nasty. She's lying all the time. When she opens the mouth, she starts lying. Because I think the challenge is to consider her as a character, as a present character, and to consider her also as a human being with all the flaws and mistakes, but not to exonerate her, not to excuse her responsibility, making propaganda for a regime which was in the very end responsible for millions of deaths. Not only 6 million Jews, but when you consider the whole wartime, we can talk about 60 million people who were killed, who were murdered, most of them. And so it was really a challenge to balance it, to say, okay, here we try really to develop something, I call it empathy for Leni Riefenstahl. But at the same time, to be very precise regarding her lies. So I said in the first 10 minutes, we have to show in a very, very easy way, she is opening her mouth and she lies. And she does it. She talks about, it's a very absurd scene, in fact. She talks about triumph of the will. And she says, well, the message was just peace and work, and there no racial theory, nothing. And we just show a very, very short fragment of Streicher, Julius Streicher. He was a propagandist. He was publishing one of the worst anti-Semitic magazines in Nazi Germany. And he said at the rally, people, meaning the German people, which doesn't hold dear racial purity will perish. And so we just show it's bullshit what she says. Of course, it's full of propaganda, and it's full of racial theory and of hatred. You can call it a hate speech, which is part of the film Triumph of the Will. And so to show, okay, listen, she's lying, but then to understand the mechanism, why and how she manipulated and how she wanted to rescue something of her life by identifying with the strongness, with the aggression, not only of her father, but you can also think about Joseph Goebbels, just mentioning something like she raped her against her will. So she was, from the very, very first moments of her life, she was confronted with aggression. And it's one storyline which goes through her life. And in a way, we can understand why she had to repress a lot of her memories, and even the memories of the cruelty of the war. When you think about her presence at one of the first massacres of Jews, she was an eyewitness, and maybe even more of one of the first massacres of Jews in Poland, in the Polish campaign in September 1939. And even this, she's about to just to repress. No, I was not present. It's in the film. I was far away. I just heard something.
Sie hatte 22 Juden erschossen gesehen.
Nein, ist alles nicht wahr. Ich habe keine Scheußlichkeiten überhaupt gesehen.
Yeah, that's a really shocking moment in the film. I mean, basically right after the invasion of Poland, so within days, she is sent there to be sort of a war photographer of sorts, and she witnesses the murder of Jews, and then, as you say, afterwards conveniently pretends, no, absolutely not. I saw no such thing. I had no idea what was going on, Amazing.
There's, to me, a thread in your film that is incredibly powerful, just as a Black person. And that's how she sees and how she describes and views and perpetuates certain images of Blackness. And it starts at the Olympics with Jesse Owens. And in interviews, she's talking about Jesse Owens and the Black athletes. in ways that are, almost voyeuristic and slightly lurid, talking about their muscularity and their physicality, and they move like animals and things like that. So there's that early on. Then much later, post Olympics, post war, as she tries to rehabilitate her image as a photojournalist, she goes to the Sudan and takes these books, which are meant to be documentary books on the Nuba people, the blacks there. And on the one hand, people are like, oh, this is incredible work, but there's some behind the scenes footage, some B roll of her directing these indigenous people. And, she's not an objective observer. I mean, she's not only in there directing, but she's being very belligerent and staging and orchestrating and really using what I consider Black people as emotional furniture. Get them where you want so you can get the emotion that you want from an audience. It was amazing.
Actually, when we got this footage, you can call it backstage footage of how she was treating people in Sudan, in the villages where she took all these pictures. It was horrifying. Why? Because she was just pushing them around, getting a specific angle or a specific behavior or whatever, pushing them around like marionettes. And to get some results, she was trying to get the children and to convince them to cooperate. And she was just giving them sweeties, but it was like feeding animals. They were running after the sweeties, and she was smiling, and she was hitting them with a stick.
Yeah.
And it was really not only racist perspective of colonialism, but it was shocking for me how she was abusing her objects, the people, village people of the Nuba. And in fact, it was absurd to be in Telluride, for example, last year with the film. And I learned there was an exhibition in 2012 of her Nuba photos. So she was just a famous photographer, even at one of the most famous festivals in the US. She was treated like a star with the Nuba photos in 2012. And after showing the film, of course, the question came up, how could we just admire her, not asking one question, how these photos were, how she took these photos, being a racist, being a colonialist photographer.
You say these things about how can we forget? How can we not know that? And that's sort of a theme of this film, because there are these questions, what did she, it's like the Watergate question. What did she know? When did she know it? But there's something else that goes on in the film. And this is not just about the German people, but it's shown in this film, or it's seen in this film. There's a particular talk show that Leni Riefenstahl is on, I believe in like the mid 70s. And she sat opposite another woman about her age who, did resist, in the sense that she was not complicit in what the Nazis were doing. Another woman who tried to do anything she could to not be part of what was going on. And you have these phone calls or letters or telegrams that come in from a German audience that says to Leni, we're so proud of you for standing up for your beliefs. So many of us didn't know. We didn't, why do people keep bringing this up? And I think of countries around the world, whether what's going on in the Ukraine and Russian people denying that, whether what's going on in America, where people pretend Jan 6th they were just tourists at the White House. And I just wonder for you culturally, if that's just, you made a film about human nature, is denial part of the nature? Because in some ways, we're complicit. I like to buy clothes that don't cost a fortune, but that means somebody somewhere is working for nothing to make them. I'm curious about the larger issues of humanity and what it says.
John, it's a very, very important question to see it in a universal perspective. And Riefenstahl, that's what I said, is a prototype not only of fascism, but also of denial. And the interesting point is not just the moral question, oh, she's lying or she's denying something. No, the interesting question is the background, or you can call it the roots of it, why it is necessary for her, all this denial. And not only in her case, you mentioned the talk show, it's thousands of people who wrote to her and who just celebrate her, not only as a star, but as somebody who says, now we are fed up with the guilt debate. We are fed up with the German past. Now we have to look, we are strong again. We are a very economically strong nation. We can be proud of Volkswagen and the German soccer team, etc., etc. So it's a denial of guilt. It's a denial of looking back. It's a denial of coming to terms with a rotten past and present. So, and that's for me something which is really threatening, because I experience it all over. I traveled a lot with the film, and when I think about Poland, we are speaking a lot about the Russian propaganda, how it works, and when you think about the parades in Moscow, it's so close to Triumph of the Will. Really, the way Putin is staged, the low angle shot on him, how the soldiers are marching head up, and you really see there's a role model. It's Triumph of the Will, and in many other countries, there's the threat of the far right and the rising of the far right, and it's a shift of some sort of morality that, let's say, the resentment against foreigners, the resentment against people who don't belong to us. It's, let's say, 10 years ago, there was, of course, people were always thinking like that, but they were somehow ashamed to talk about it publicly. And now there's a loss of shame. It's somehow normal. And this shift is really threatening. And you can see it also in the film, how people in the talk show, how the reactions of the audience, of thousands of letters and phone calls, and she taped all these phone calls. That's interesting. And you can see people want to be proud of her nation, and they want to go back to morality and decency and virtue. And they, even one of the people who spoke at the phone with her, he said it will take 20 years, and then Germany will find its way back to virtue, morality, order. And that's something we experience right now. It's not a film about the past. It's a film about the present, not only in Germany, in many, many other countries too. And so I think that's one of the disturbing reasons why the film is so successful. Because we can, somehow it's a safe space, because it's Leni Riefenstahl, it's a person who lived ages ago and died, let's say, 22 years ago. But as she said, it will take one or two generations. Then we will experience a renaissance of the ideology, a renaissance of the aesthetics. And that's something which is like a dark prophecy, and it became true.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point that you and John are making of how it speaks to today. And so interesting to watch the film again a year later, because last year when it premiered at Venice and then went to Telluride, we were in the middle of in the United States of the presidential election, which returned Donald Trump to power. And I think there are many, many disturbing echoes, at least for me, in what we see in your film and what is happening now under Trump. And I'll just a few examples, because we speak is just 2 or 3 days ago, where Trump held a cabinet meeting that lasted over 3 hours, and around the room, all of his cabinet officials praised him in the most, absurd, sycophantic manner. And in your film, there we see countless examples of that. Certainly Rudolf Hess giving a speech, an idolatrous speech of Hitler, of how he has saved the nation and the wonderful things he's doing. It's like, wow, you overlay that with how so many people in the Republican Party are kneeling before Trump, and it's very disturbing.
Yeah, and I tell you frankly, I'm very interested how the debates now will be different from September last year in Telluride, because last year, people really 1 hour after the end of the screening were encircling me and pushing me. We have to have the film before the elections because it's a film about fascism, and we have not a real understanding in this country because it was something which was far away. It was in other countries. And so actually I had in Boston some 2 months ago, I had a debate, and suddenly it was just debate about the past. It had nothing to do. The reaction was so, I felt there was a sort of intimidation. Nobody was willing to build any bridge to the present. And so I'm very interested what kind of debate we will have after the screenings, and how the reactions in the media, in the press, will touch the topicality of the film, or make some sort of reserve it to the past and to a filmmaker of the last century.
Yeah, and I would also add that obviously the Olympics are coming back to Los Angeles in 2028, and the 1936 games are remembered as Hitler's games, and we see in your film footage of the Austrian athletes and athletes from many other countries who were giving the Nazi salute in the main stadium in 36. And Hitler's right there taking in the adulation. And I mention that because there's a lot of concern about Trump and his intended role with the American Olympics. He's already issued just a few weeks ago, an order involving himself in the Olympic Games, and we'll see how that develops. But it's a very disturbing thought that of Trump presiding over the games in the way that Hitler did in 36.
Yeah, Hitler used it, and Leni Riefenstahl. In fact, I was counting the shots with Adolf Hitler. So because he always said it's not a non-political film, and Hitler was against just having the event at all in Berlin in 1936. He was not interested at all. He is in the first part 26 times. You can watch him by joining a lot of competitions, and so it's a, you can call it even, it's a heroic portrait of Adolf Hitler being present in and at Olympia.
Wow.
I have a question for you, Mr. Veiel. You're making a film, this moving away from the subject itself to the aesthetic a little bit, because the film is really an amazing film in and of itself. Your film, I'm talking about, Riefenstahl, not her work, although it is visually amazing as well. Your use of the audio and her personal recordings, the use of footage that was previously recorded of her, but it's slowed down in some spaces. You push in some spaces. I'm curious for you, just about your aesthetic approach. And then also, I'm curious, did you have any qualms about making a film about one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived? Because I think that's got to be a daunting task. And yet you certainly brought your own style and your own feel to your film.
Of course, it was, first of all, regarding the qualms. It, from the very first moment, it was a challenge, and also a tightrope walk, because I wanted to, in a way, also to celebrate her abilities as an editor. And when you think of the high diving scenes, it's great editing. And on the other hand, it's full of, somehow we had to change the music. We had to create a style where we, again, like a tightrope walk, to accept the greatness of the scenes, but have a little question mark at the same time. So it was a challenge to work to find a composer who would walk with us on this tightrope. And it was a challenge not to just to affirm the strengths of her abilities, the strong capabilities of an editor like Leni Riefenstahl, but also to show how she worked with it. And when you ask about the formal approach of my film, of our film, we discovered it by chance because she was working with a Steenbeck editing table. Yeah. And we found this editing table in the Deutsche Kinemathek in the museum. It's still there.
Wow.
And we worked with it in a way that we said, okay, let's work with the stripes of the films and film it from the editing table. And that was the discovery of the aesthetics that we thought, okay, let's look how she looked on the material, on the footage.
It's genius.
So it was partly to celebrate her, but at the same time to analyze how she produced propaganda. And that was a big chance. When you see, we did it with a scene of Adolf Hitler. And so it's not him, it's the young people in Triumph of the Will, so-called Hitlerjungen, who admired her, looking at him. And you can see her, observe her, not only doing the job as a great editor, but also by staging the young people and keeping their faces up. And you see both creating the scene and then editing it in the style, which is, in a way, topic till today. I was talking about the scenes of Putin when he celebrates the May parades in Moscow, but you can see it Xi Jinping in Peking. You can see it not only in North Korea, you can see the aesthetics in many, many other countries by a new kind of national terrorism and, supremacy.
Yeah, I think that it's a visually extraordinary film. And I mean, the editing and just approach is, I think, is quite stunning. And as we speak, you will be coming to the U.S., opening in New York and then Los Angeles, and you'll be heading to Chicago as well for more screenings.
Yeah, and San Francisco. The last
San Francisco, okay.
will be in San Francisco. Yes, after LA.
Yeah, and you're being distributed by Kino Lorber, which has a great track record with, films in general, but certainly ones in the Oscar race, including this past year soundtrack to a coup d'etat. And your film will be submitted for Oscar consideration. So I'm personally very excited about the reception for your film and hoping the Doc Branch members will get to see it, because I think it's definitely one of the best films of the year. So my heartiest congratulations to you.
Thank you, Matt and John, also for the good questions.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to echo what Matt says. Beautiful film, and we're rooting for you. So all the best.
Yeah. Thank you. And take care.
Matt, again, you were not wrong. This is an amazing film. It is a powerful film. And I really appreciate that Andres, in so many ways, did not, as he says, try to just merely indict Leni Riefenstahl, but lay out the evidence. And in some cases, I mean, really, truly lay it out and let an audience decide for themselves whether this person was an innocent bystander or an active participant in Nazism.
Yeah, I think it's a really, to me anyway, very powerful and disturbing film.
Yeah.
And we see this incredible force of Leni Riefenstahl's personality, where she's basically attacking people on television shows. Anyone would raise the specter of her association, which is clear, with Hitler, with Goebbels, with other key members of the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
And so, it's a film that really hit me hard, but a work of really great sensitivity and visual expression in and of itself.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, kudos to Kino Lorber for picking it up and for giving it a distribution in theaters. We talk about this all the time. It's a tough time out there for documentaries. So if you are within the sound of our voices, if you love documentaries, please go support these films when they're in the theater. Vote with your dollars. Matt, thank you so much for this week's episode. Safe travels to you as you head up to the Toronto International Film Festival. I hope you have a wonderful time. I know you've seen some films. Please look forward to your reporting from there. And, heads up on some things that may be starting to take off as we unbelievably start to head into the fall season. Oh my God, I can't believe we're heading in that direction.
Yeah.
Much more to come. Much more to come.
Much more to come. I know you'll be traveling as well in October. So
yeah,
we're getting our frequent flyer mile accounts padded here and there. But
I'm just going to say very quickly, you may be padding yours. I'm at that space in my life where I'm trying to get rid of them. I don't know how many more trips I have in me. So yeah, but I do have some travels coming up. But safe travels to you, Matt. Please enjoy the Toronto Film Festival. Look forward to talking to you afterwards and look forward to speaking with everybody again on Doc Talk. Thank you.